Hello, everybody. Good evening, and welcome to another one of these Light and Land virtual tours. And this time we are heading, with a minor diversion, to New Zealand. But before we get to that, can I just please welcome Ben Osborne. Ben, good evening.
Good evening. Hello. Welcome to everybody watching.
Thank you. And if you are out there watching, do let us know where you are. It's been really good to see all of those comments coming in. And we've had people from all over the world. So do drop us a note in the comment and give it a like and a share is always much appreciated as well. And like usual, myself and Ben are going to talk through a number of images. We're going to cover some obviously technical things, some location related things. And I really want to dig into Ben's background a little bit because he's a super experienced photographer in both landscape and indeed wildlife. And this trip and the New Zealand images that we have to share with you will cover both of those major aspects. And Ben really is an expert in both of them. So without any further ado, Ben, we are having a little diversion here, but if you can just explain why and lead us into that, and we'll go onwards from there towards New Zealand.
Okay, we're going to have a diversion up to the Peak District. In fact, normally I would feature Shropshire, which is where I live, and spend a lot of my time photographing. But we're going to go up to the Peak District because Light and Land are running a one-day workshop. We're going to go to Padley Gorge for a day in late September. And it illustrates the kind of things that we're going to be seeing in New Zealand as well. So it gives you a sort of flavour of the sort of pictures that I take, the kind of work I do, the kind of techniques I use, and it just sort of introduces a sort of photographic style and photographic ideas, which we can then take on to the sort of bigger landscapes in New Zealand.
Yeah, fantastic. And welcome to all of those coming in. Any of you joining us later. Myself and Ben are going to take you to New Zealand in just a few minutes, but we're just covering a little bit of UK related stuff beforehand. And as I just sort of flick through a couple of these, there's a huge thing going on here, which is colour, firstly, greens, and sort of chaos and rhythm, I think is probably a good thing to say. And as you mentioned, Ben, a lot of these sorts of scenes that you enjoy playing with here are apparent in New Zealand, and we'll go on to see that.
Yeah, woodland. I mean, I love photographing woodland. It's not easy. Woodlands are sort of chaotic, crazy places, and there's sort of lines everywhere. There's all kinds of textures. There's all kinds of colours. You get the light can be very difficult as well. So working in woodlands is actually quite challenging. But when you get it right, it can be very satisfying indeed. Like, for example, this image here, where we've got this fantastic old beech tree, just kind of, it's just attached to this boulder, and the roots are going out and finding their way into the soil around the rocks. And then the whole thing, because it's quite a damp place, has got covered in moss. So you've got mossy boulders, mossy tree, and you've got very different textures of those two elements of the image. So this was, I took this on. It was a wet day, in fact, and actually the rain has enhanced the colours. It's enhanced the shininess on the upper branches and the bits of roots that are showing. And so you've got to kind of. This picture sort of encapsulates a lot of what woodlands are about. You've got a lot of growth, a lot of kind of vitality and vibrancy in these colours, even on a sort of dull, overcast, rainy day. And that's one thing I would certainly say for a start, is that don't be shy of those sort of conditions. There really are no wrong conditions for photography. There's always some sort of light. There's always a way of using it. It's always, it can always be special in some way. It's just finding the right subject and the right way of treating it. And one of the things we do in Padley Gorge, we look at techniques, different techniques. So, for example, this one. This is an image with a sort of multiple exposure with some close-ups of a sort of leafy forest floor plus some oak trees in the background. And so it's obviously a sort of build-up of various different images within the camera. And so that's the kind of technique, again, we can practice in a one-day workshop. And if you've practiced it beforehand, then if you go on a big tour, you've got that sort of tool in your toolbox, as it were, and it's that technique which you've got a handle on, which you can then use, and when you're away somewhere really special. So these one-day workshops are quite important, actually. You can really learn a lot. So that, for example, is a sort of multiple exposure. I think there's another one coming up, which is looking at sort of longer exposures. So where you've got the camera on a tripod, absolutely solid, and let things move through the frame. So, for example, in the foreground here, we've got water moving in a sort of several second exposure, and we've got a water swirling around the sort of multiple pools in the foreground and down over the cascade. And also in the background, there's there's a bush that's been blown by the wind, and so that's actually moving as well within the exposure. So using, suddenly with a camera on a tripod, using a longer exposure, you can make very different images. And so it's these sort of techniques that you can really sort of focus on a one-day workshop, and you can get to know your camera, you can get to understand techniques, you can really understand a lot, and then you can take that abroad. And once you get to New Zealand, if you start sort of panicking, you think, oh, I didn't know how to do that, I have no idea, well, we can certainly teach you there, but if you come sort of pre-armed, as it were, then it's much, then you get a lot more out of it.
Yeah, definitely. And just to finish on that point, Ben, is great about the one-day workshops. And obviously Light and Land do a good number of those in different places. And often it's not about what you do and take away, the shot you make on the day necessarily, but our goal is to arm you with ways of interpreting whatever landscapes you might be going to on your trips and or around your local area. So although you think, oh, I'm only getting them for a day, you're actually going to get useful content that will help you onwards throughout all of your trips across various places. And I think you and I, Ben, are big sort of believers in that.
Absolutely. I mean, there's nothing like getting out of the camera and just trying new things on a workshop, somewhere, especially if it's on your doorstep, you can really get to grips with a place and you get ideas that you can then go and work on in your own time, and you learn an awful lot from that sort of thing.
Yeah, good stuff. Well, for everyone who's just joined us as well, welcome along. We are now going to jump to New Zealand, and I'm actually pausing because I'm going to just try and throw up a quick poll on this live stream, which I've not done before, and I really am taking my multitasking skills quite to the edge here. So, but we're going to ask that question: how many of you actually been to New Zealand? So if you can see the poll, just drop us a comment in that, because I'm having a few things coming in from people saying I have been, a couple of people saying I've never been, but I'd love to go. So do let us know on that one. And hello to all of you from the Netherlands, Cornwall, Kent, Scotland, Manchester, Sussex, and so on and so forth. But Ben, we have landed in the South Island of New Zealand, and just outline for us a little, because we're just going to be covering the South Island tonight, and as you do on the tour, correct?
Yeah, so the tour goes to South Island only. We did one 3 years ago, which went to both islands, North and South. It just proved to be a little bit long, and I think we felt we could focus on the sort of highlights of the South Island and get a lot more sort of photography in and rather less traveling. So we're going to go to a variety of really top locations. We're working with a local New Zealand photographer called Richard Young. In fact, we're going to show some of his pictures tonight. He may even be listening in. I think it's somewhere, it's sort of coffee time in the morning down in New Zealand. So he might pop in a comment as well, so you could look out for that. We're working with him, and he really spends his whole time, he's spent the last 10 years photographing New Zealand. So he is extremely well aware of all the really top locations. And we're working alongside him. He's coming with us. He's a really good guy, a good friend of mine, and an extremely good photographer. And so he brings an awful lot to the party. So we're going to go to the west coast, where we got rainforests, which you can see in this picture. We're slightly out of order here. We're not going there first, but we're going to deal with it first because it's sort of segued on from Padley Gorge in Derbyshire, because it's forests and woodlands. And then we're going to go to Mount Cook and all various other places. So we're going to we'll get into the sort of itinerary in a minute. But I thought that these west coast Troit rainforests were a good place to start, because they're very beautiful, but they're equally, like the forests in Britain, they're very difficult to photograph. And so your access is obviously made easier by things like these pathways, these boardwalks that they make. There's a fantastically good conservation network in New Zealand, and all the trails are very well marked. And so access is brilliant. It's very easy to walk around some of these locations. But taking a picture of a sort of random forest is quite tricky. So when you get there, you kind of look around, and just sort of trees everywhere. There's amazing ferns. There's just, everything. It's a feast for the eyes, but you kind of think, how do I, define that within the kind of constraints of a photographic viewfinder, and how do I actually make pictures of this? And it's quite tricky. And you kind of think that there's I mean, years ago, I've got it right here. There's a book called "In Wildness is the Preservation of the World," and it's a book of photographs by Elliot Porter, who's a very famous American photographer, and he's illustrating quotes from Henry Thoreau, from Walden, and various other writings. And I looked at this book. I've had this book for absolutely years, and a lot of the woodland and forest pictures look very sort of confusing, and you think, is that a good picture? Is that a no? It must be good because it's Elliot Porter's picture. I can't. So what are we looking for in a forest image? So I think maybe this is a moment to move on to one that I took from this boardwalk, looking out into the forest. Now it just at first glance, it looks a bit chaotic. It looks like there's no structure here. It looks like it's just a sort of mass of ferns and moss and wood and trees and actually water. These little bright specks dotted throughout the image are actually water. The water table is about a foot below that boardwalk. And it's the most amazing sort of creek system and bog and swamp. And yet, actually, within this image, there are lots of different elements which do connect. There are, from the sort of bottom right and bottom left hand corner, there are logs which are both sort of covered in moss, and they've got plants growing out of them. They kind of meet up, and then there's a sort of little circle in the middle with a little pool in it, which is quite a sort of feature of the image. And then other branches lead you away towards the background and up towards that trunk going upwards with the light just catching the moss on it. And so in a way, the sort of mixture of, there are sort of ferns that take you through the picture. There's moss that takes you through the picture. There are dots of water that take you through. And then you've got that sort of background where you go into that sort of intensity of, really quite chaotic growth. I mean, nature is not organized into a sort of, beautiful little photograph all the time. And I think it's quite fun to explore that chaos and enjoy it actually, and allow the people who view, yourself, who you view your own pictures, but also allow your audience to kind of explore the sort of chaos of a picture like this. So it's not got that sort of conventional photographic this, that, and the other, front, middle, and back, but it does draw the eye in all sorts of different directions. So it sort of goes a little bit against the grain, but I think that's quite interesting. To be honest, I'm a great rule breaker. You've got these sort of rules of put that there and that there. I'm not ever sure I really, go along with any of that. I was a bit of a rebel at school, I suppose, and it hasn't really stopped. No.
So hold on tonight, everyone. You've got two hidden rebels. Maybe Ben's less hidden than me, but no. Well, I'm really glad you put this in, Ben, because this is absolutely up my street, and I concur with everything you said. There's chaos, but actually there's really, truly a lot of order, and a lot of the things that you mentioned to do with how the branches are used as this sort of four-way segmentation through the frame. And actually, what I would say, it's the kind of thing that printed A3, A2, A1 would just be something to just dive into and really, really enjoy, even more than on a smaller screen, for example, because there's so many little stories and nooks and crannies and just the luminosity of some of the leaves and everything else. So I love it. But as we walk through these images, we're going to show perhaps that chaos and embracing chaos, and then really simplifying is a sliding scale, and depending on where you might be and how you might see the world, you can work on that. And obviously that's what people, and Ben could absolutely help you do. Lots of love coming in for this one actually, Ben, as well. So
okay.
As I just move us on, I am just going to try and publish the poll here. So of the viewers, thank you all of you for voting. That's really cool. We'll try and get some more interactivity going on these. 63% of people watching have not been to New Zealand, 37% have.
Wow, okay.
So there we go.
That's a lot who have. That's yeah.
Yeah, so no pressure. But yeah. As we walk through, there's a couple of images here, Ben, and we stay in this kind of rainforest feel. And I've been lucky enough to go to New Zealand and spend a little bit of time in these areas. And I find them very visually busy, which they are. And you've talked about sort of embracing that. But here, you've stripped back a little further into more traditional segmentations. Is that fair to say, within the frame?
Yeah, I think this is more conventional territory, really. This is, again, from the same boardwalk, but there was a bit of a bigger pool in front of me here. And so, we could, these are taken on the last tour that we did. You could sort of stand back a little bit. So you had that sort of foreground of the water and the kind of light sort of reflecting off the surface of the water. And then that goes back into those sort of tussocks of moss. And then the sort of forest further on is framed by the two logs that go kind of one off to the right, one off to the left, which also have that sort of mossy theme as well. So there are sort of connecting themes through the image, and then there's quite a biggish fern in the middle and a smaller one as well in the foreground. So and further more ferns. There's ferns everywhere in New Zealand. They're absolutely a kind of universal thing. And we'll do a couple more ferns in a minute. But in these cases, they kind of, you know, you've got that sort of structure of, you know, various sort of structures within the picture, and you know, it's it sort of adds up, I think, in a slightly better way than last time. Last time was a little bit more chaotic, and this is a little bit more structured.
Yeah, and diagonals is something we've talked about with a few of the people on here, but you know, using what is there, I suppose, as lines to help in and out of images. But I wonder actually, Ben, whether when you're there with guests, you know, do you find some people just embrace these more chaotic scenes and others find them really difficult?
Yeah, I think some of them, you know, I think some people. People struggle to start with. You know, you kind of think, well, do I really, you know, I don't understand this. I can't see any pictures. I'm walking around this forest and it's all a bit chaotic. And you sort of gradually, you just have to be there. You have to stand there and just think, you know, where are the pictures? This is where we can help you, obviously. You know, we can sort of say, find a foreground like this fern in this case. So this is a much easier, you know, much more simple situation than the last two. So here you've got a fern. It's kind of really obvious. You can make a big foreground. You can stand there with a wide angle lens and make a big solid foreground, and then have everything else receding into the background. So you can start, I mean, we kind of did this the wrong way around, but I quite like that. You could start with something more like this. So this is, you know, much more conventional, and says, you know, put a fern in the foreground, have a sort of middle distance of a few mossy branches, and then you've got a sort of distant kind of fade out, you know, beyond. And so that's a more conventional structure. So we can guide you to those sorts of situations and say, right, start with this is fairly obvious, and then move on to these rather more chaotic scenes. So whatever forest you're in, I think that's something that you know, you should concentrate on. So try and make order out of it to start with, and then go into the kind of more random bits.
Yeah, and as we continue our journey towards simplification, and also featuring the fern, which is so iconic of New Zealand, and if anyone's familiar with, you know, the black and white flag, the New Zealand, the Kiwi flag, whatever you want to call it, the ferns are everywhere. But this is now a really great example of how to let something really speak at the front of the frame, and let our eyes focus on it whilst being aware of what's going on behind. And all these beautiful curls, you know, we have the curl of the mane and every little curl coming up to it. So tell us a little bit here, Ben, about this one.
Well, the koru, or this sort of curled piece of the, you know, new frond of the fern, is a very strong Maori symbol. So it's a very strong sort of, you know, it's very symbolic with it in New Zealand. And here we've got the main one, and also lots of little ones going up the stem as well. And this, so again, we're in a slightly different territory here to the other images we just looked at. They were sort of wider images encompassing a lot of the woodland, but obviously these woodlands have detail in them. And I think it's really quite often very, you know, it's really important to look for those details. And that's, again, another way of focusing your camera and focusing your mind on trying to find a particular image. So this one, for example, I wanted to feature the koru, you know, that spiral at the top of the fern, but I wanted the background to not be too distracting. I wanted it to have elements of fern, but not be completely, you know, just chaotic. And so here, the fern was in a sort of shadow, and the background was in slightly more of a patch of light coming in through the forest. And so I exposed this image on the fern to get the right exposure on that, and that sort of effectively blew out the highlights in the background, which is exactly what I wanted, just to kind of highlight. It's basically a sort of high key technique, but equally those fern fronds in the lower part of the image give that sort of essence of fern. You know, it's got those fern leaves, which are there just to complement the fern sort of spiral. So those two elements, the spiral and the fern leaves out of focus in the bottom of the image, just sort of basically say ferns, but they feature the spiral rather than the leaves. So there's two different elements you can work with. You know, the leaves themselves make great pictures, but also the spirals do as well.
Yeah, and a great example through those last 3 or 4 images of how even in one 10-yard space, probably, I know they were from different than that, but in one 10 to 20-yard space in a woodland like that, there are just an absolute myriad of opportunities. And perhaps the challenge really is just actually restricting yourself in a way to that small area to really feel it and start to see it, right?
Well, that's one thing we do on this tour. We make sure we've got time in locations. It's so critical. You don't just turn up somewhere, put your camera up, take a picture, and move on. You know, that's never my style ever. We just don't do it, except unless it's just we're driving a long distance and we just get out to stretch our legs, then we might do that. But when we actually get to a location where we want to start making some images, we definitely take our time. We make sure people, you know, have got time to get out, have a look around. You know, don't even get your camera out to start with. Have a look at what there is there, and then start, you know, trying to create images. And again, we can help you with that sort of trying to find within the chaos, trying to find images. And so it's all about having time. I mean, a lot of photography, it's just being out there, using your eyes, understanding where you are, really not just looking, but seeing where you are and understanding it. And then you can start, you know, visualizing images and start creating them.
Yeah, that's when the good stuff happens.
Yeah.
So just a quick bit of housekeeping. I just reopened the poll because there was a couple of people saying they couldn't see it. So basically we open it up and then I will close the poll so it will come off the screen. If you've answered and you think, why is it in my way? You can just use the little X button in the top right of the poll question and that will just get rid of it so you don't have to see it. But I'm going to just close that for a moment again, but we may well ask another couple of questions further on. There's one question at the end I want to ask as well, so I'll be putting that back up on the poll. And if, as we go through, if there are particular questions that you want to ask Ben about New Zealand, about the images, about the techniques, about anything photography related, of course, do put them in the comments and I will try and grab those as we go along. But Ben, obviously New Zealand, especially the South Island, has this huge, well, the Southern Alps, there's a huge mountain range straight up the middle of it, as we've talked about. And so there's a huge amount of shooting opportunities. And I know we've looked at the woodland there and the tropical end of things, but let's get into the mountains because Mount Cook is a very spectacular part. And we do spend a couple of nights there, that's right?
Yeah, we start there actually. The tour starts in Christchurch. We drive straight across to Mount Cook and spend a couple of nights at Mount Cook Village in a hotel called the Hermitage, and we look straight out at this scene pretty much. Although to photograph it, it's better to go along the road a little way and along a footpath. But you can see this pretty much this view from the hotel. So it's a very spectacular place to be located. And the advantage of being there 2 nights is we get the chance to see, you know, sunrise, sunset, and it is really a spectacular place. And it's an amazing mountain. It's the highest mountain in New Zealand, and you're right sort of in the middle, in the sort of heart of the Southern Alps. And as you say, the Southern Alps goes right the way from sort of top to bottom of South Island, and you've got the sort of west coast, which is wetter, and the east coast, which is drier. And this is just this range of mountains that goes straight up the island, and we sort of crisscross it a little bit on this tour. This is sort of one of the highlights at very near the beginning of the tour, where we can spend a bit of time photographing the mountain. There's also big rivers and lakes in that area as well, and we certainly would get out for a sunset shoot. And it's just an extremely spectacular area of mountains, not just Mount Cook itself, but there are other ones around and about. And you get this sort of wonderful, especially at sunset, well and sunrise. This is a sunset shot, and you get this wonderful sort of, you know, dark shadows, you know, which are really, really black, you know, and then the light just sort of, you know, moves up the mountain and changes color, and it went from sort of really quite harsh white sunlight, and it got more and more orange and orange and orange, and then it went pinker, and then it kind of left the tip of the mountain completely, and there was a kind of afterglow on the you know, snow slopes. And because it's covered in snow, obviously it's reflecting everything that the light, you know, the atmosphere throws at it, and so you can get these really sort of quite contrasty images, but they're very beautiful, where you just get all the detail of these amazing mountain slopes picked out by the setting sun.
Yeah, and I mean, you and I both love a good mountain, and anyone who saw the talk last week knows I love my mountains. But there is a certain quality of light, and a lot of people who come and walk in these places, they don't see it at these times. It's amazing, and it can be a completely different beast, like Ben said there early and later on in the day. And I love this great use of the dark shadow here on the right hand side, and it absolutely, for me, it absolutely works. These lovely lines that just relate and correlate with each other. Diagonals everywhere. I won't go on too heavily about that tonight. But
I tried to put a few triangles in for you.
yeah, thank you. Everyone knows.
After last week, I thought, right, better put a few triangles in.
There's one whacking one in the middle, but we'll move on because I know, and hopefully a lot of people will see that this is one of the trips where you really have a huge amount of variety in what you can shoot. And we're going to get some wildlife later as well and other parts of New Zealand. But astro is something that really benefits from beautiful, clear and clean air. And so I would imagine here, that is a great thing to go out and explore.
Yeah, I mean, from Mount Cook, it's a pretty obvious one to have a go at if you get a clear sky. One of the nights we're there, then we'd certainly go out and have a go at astrophotography. And this is one of Richard's images. Astrophotography is one of his specialities. So you've got a sort of local expert, not only knowing the locations, but knowing the techniques. And I've done a bit of astrophotography in, well, all over the world, really. But so both of us have got a reasonable handle on it. And this is one of his pictures of a group having a go at photographing the Milky Way just next to Mount Cook. So you get this fantastic starry sky, and the skies in New Zealand, you know, they are very clear, and certainly in the mountains, you know, it's all sort of like a dark sky area. I know in Britain we've got one or two locations, in fact Shropshire where I am now, is a dark sky area and very good for astrophotography, but New Zealand, pretty much all of it is, you know, so certainly around the Southern Alps. So we've got great opportunities for that, but Mount Cook would be the sort of place which is particularly special. So we'll have a go at that.
Yeah, fab. And that again is another technique. If you were heading out there, it's one thing you to maybe have a little play with even before you go, but if you need help while you're there, you've got plenty of help that's going to come. And I think seeing a location in all times of the day and night is a really great way just to get under the skin of it, and it's something you take away with you and you'll always remember. You know what I mean? It's those special moments, isn't it, that define trips for me and define relationships with the landscape.
Very much so. It's like the landscapes on your doorstep. You know, you see them at all different seasons. You see them in the daytime, maybe in the nighttime, and yeah, it is that sort of growing relationship you can have with a place. Now, obviously, when you're traveling on a tour and you're dotting around lots of places, you don't develop quite the same sort of feel for it. But it is good to spend a little bit longer in certain locations, and we make sure we spend time here just so you get a feel of, you know, what it has to offer. Definitely that. Yeah.
Now, as you physically move on, this is an area, sadly, I didn't get a chance to get to, but I know photographically is extremely interesting because of these amazing rocks. So tell us, and they're not huge turtles, but tell us more, Ben, about how you moved to here and some of the, you know, the unique nature of this particular location.
Okay, well, from Mount Cook we head south and east down towards the Otago Peninsula, but on the way we hit the coast here where we've got these boulders called the Meraki Boulders. Again, this is one of Richard's images, and one of his specialities is to A, get us to the right locations, but B, at the right time of day. So, you know, dawn and dusk are a very good time to photograph these boulders. They're quite big. I mean, they can sort of be up to 2 meters in diameter, these things, and they're, you know, dotted along this stretch of beach. And one of the other things that both he and I specialize in is long exposures. And again, with the sea kind of washing in and out past these boulders, you've got the opportunity to make sort of longer exposures and get these sort of trails of water as they come in and swirl around the boulders. So they're spectacular. It's a big foreground. You know, obviously we're back into more conventional landscape photography here, but you've also got a sort of range of techniques you can use here to make them a lot more interesting and to really emphasize the kind of solidity of these great big sort of concretions. I would say if you want to practice on these sort of things, they're actually quite similar to the ones that we visit on the Neudart tour. In fact, the Neudart tour next year is actually fully booked, but I'd recommend it to anyone in future years, because there are some, not totally, I mean, they're nothing like this big and this scale, but there are some extraordinary concretions on the Isle of Egg that we go and visit on that tour. So
yeah. And I think just from a technical point of view, getting the right shutter speed, and that's something you can experiment with, isn't it? And moving water is a great thing to play with generally, I find, photographically. You're the same, I think.
Well, moving water and stationary boulders, so you've got that sort of contrast between the moving bits of the image and the stationary ones, and in a way the stationary ones just emphasize the movement of the water. So yeah, absolutely, I think water, but you can also use long exposures for clouds and trees waving in the wind and all kinds of things. But I agree absolutely that water is the sort of possibly the place to start if you're not familiar with those sort of techniques, and it's certainly a very effective way of using long exposures. Yeah, and you can experiment. I mean, I think the interesting thing is some people like those sort of effects, some people don't. Some people like them more blurry, some like less. And I think somewhere like this, you've got the opportunity to experiment and work with different exposure times and see what happens. And then we can discuss them afterwards. We can have a look at the images, see who likes what. I mean, these sort of things can be quite a personal sort of opinion about which is the best, or the best in inverted commas. There's no best. What are the images that you personally like and respond to, and which are the ones that you aren't so keen on and think look too artificial maybe, or something like that. So and that's all about developing your own personal sort of way of taking of photography and making images.
Yeah, and lovely sort of palettes there as well. Not at all overdone. Very, very natural, and that sea just looks gorgeous. And just a couple of quick things I'm going to pick up from the comments. So John's hello from Milan. Is this recorded so we can watch later too? Yes, it will stay on the Facebook page, and so you can go back to the beginning and watch from the beginning. And if you sign up to the Lightland newsletter, you'll also get a link to be able to view it on there from the beginning at some point as well. A quick question about if we can share all the technical details for each shot. Yes, I'd love to. Doing multiple ones of these every week with lots of different people, that could get really tricky, and because of how we share the screen, that's not wholly practical. But if you have any specific questions about any of the shots, I'm more than happy to throw those to the photographers as we go. But Ben, I wanted to just get into the wildlife, because for anyone who doesn't know Ben's background, he's an extremely experienced wildlife photographer of many years. Sorry, Ben. Having traveled around the world, he won Wildlife Photographer of the Year, but done a lot of work in all parts of the world, on ships, doing work with Nat Geo. I know you've done some work for them, working with David Attenborough, amongst other people. So look, there really is nobody better to look after you from a wildlife point of view. Sorry, Ben, I'm going to say it. Yeah. So I'm totally out of my zone here. I have never gone into wildlife photography, so we're totally handing this to you. But New Zealand has its share of amazing wildlife, and you do get to see some of that on your trip. So where are we here, and what are we looking at? That's before we even get to the difficulties of these sorts of shots.
Okay, we are down, well, where we're going to go on this tour is down on the Otago Peninsula, which is just near Dunedin, sort of in the southeast corner of the South Island. We stay there in an amazing old Victorian castle, actually, which is a really cool place to stay. And I would just emphasize, this is what's called a sort of luxury tour. We stay in very nice places. You will be well looked after. I believe New Zealand has wine as well, so you'll eat and drink very, very handsomely. So that's where we're staying. We're staying in the Lanark Castle Hotel, and we are going to go out on a boat. So that gives us access to photograph albatrosses at sea, and we're also going to look at, well, one or two other species I'll talk about in a minute. Albatrosses are just the most fantastic birds. I mean, they're huge. When I say huge, something like the Northern Royal Albatross, which you get breeding on the Otago Peninsula, has got a wingspan of around 3 and a bit meters. So they're about 3.5 meters actually. So they're a very large albatross indeed. This is a white-capped albatross, which is one of the mollymawks. They're slightly smaller, with a wingspan of sort of over 2 meters. So but they're still big. And we go out in the boat, and you can see these birds reasonably close. So then we get to the technicalities of photographing them, and they're flying along at about 50 or 60 miles an hour. And when you see them at sea, they, I say we're quite close and they're quite big. They're still pretty tricky to follow focus. So it's really just a question here of getting a slightly longer lens, putting the shutter speed pretty high so you freeze the movement, and following birds, ideally as they're going across in front of you. That's the easiest way to keep them in focus. If they're coming straight towards you, then that makes life a lot more difficult. It makes for very exciting images, but it's much more difficult to keep them in focus as they come straight towards you. But modern autofocus systems on most cameras are reasonably good at keeping up with these things. And so I was going across beside the boat, and I was following it. And the really nice thing about this, I mean, I've taken thousands and thousands of images of albatrosses, but I thought this was a particularly beautiful bird. The way it's just dropping its right wing, and it's just scything through the water. That was quite unusual, actually. They don't normally touch the water. And I just like the way it's cutting a sort of little slice through the water with its wingtip there, and I just like the way the wing was spread out, and you could just see the details of the feathers. So that's why I put this picture in. In fact, this one was taken further north at Kaikoura, but you do get this species down off the Otago Peninsula as well. You get the whitecaps, northern royal. You should get bullers, and I think there's one other I've forgotten. But you get several species of albatross.
Yeah, I mean, it's frightening technique, and I mean, I've seen a couple of images you showed me once of birds from a boat bobbing around in the somewhere horrible, shot on film, and they're pin sharp. It's scary. I was like, oh my god, this guy knows what he's doing. So
that was on a yacht in the Southern Ocean with a manual focus 300mm lens.
Yes, I mean, I can't get a manual focus 300mm lens in focus on landscape, and that's not moving. So no, seriously, it's a great thing to try. And even if you're more of a landscape shooter, and I've put up a little poll actually asking people whether they shoot landscape or just wildlife or a bit of both. So if you get a chance to answer the poll there as well, that would be cool. But what I would say is, if you're in this sort of location, it seems mad not to at least explore that, even if you're more of a landscape shooter. And as we go on to show, there are particular species which are very difficult and rare to find in other places as well. And you've managed to get sort of special access to these. That's right, isn't it, Ben?
Yeah, this is something that Richard set up, and this is one of his images of the yellow-eyed penguin. This is the rarest penguin in the world. And they are found on the Otago Peninsula, and we get special access to a sort of research area. I know one or two people have said to me, oh well, cruise ships go and photograph these things, they're in sort of cages. We go out to a sort of more natural environment and get the chance to try and photograph these. So that's a very special opportunity that we've got. We've lined up on this tour, and again, that's working with a local photographer who's got the right contacts. So these are a really unusual penguin. I'm very, very excited about going to see these. I've not seen these ones. Last time we photographed a different species called the erect crested penguin on the west coast, but I'm very excited about going and seeing yellow-eyed on the east coast on this particular tour. So I think that'll be a real highlight.
Fab hairdo.
They're great.
It's a lockdown hairdo.
Absolutely. Well, no, actually, macaronis and rockhoppers are the ones, because they're good, completely mad hair going all over the place. The other thing we photograph here is the sea lions. There are they either called New Zealand sea lion or the Hooker's sea lion, which is actually the rarest sea lion in the world as well. And we get the chance to go and visit a colony of those as well when we're on the Otago area. And again, that's a real privilege to be able to go and photograph them. So the Otago Peninsula is really about wildlife. There's some very lovely landscapes as well, and a chance to get out in the boat, which is always interesting, because you never know, you might see dolphins or whatever as well. So a sort of rich wildlife experience down there.
Cool. Now, just for time reasons, I need to keep us a little honest on this, so I'll keep us moving. I know you then head back over to the southwest side to Doubtful Sound. Now, many people may know Milford Sound, so just tell us a little bit though, because you guys choose to go out on the boat in Doubtful, don't you?
We do, and we go out here and we spend a night out here in the Sound. It's much more remote than Milford Sound, and there's very, very few people around here, very few boats, and we go out on the one boat where you can go out and stay overnight. So we spend the night on the boat, and you can go into these very remote fjords, and you're just surrounded by these massive mountain walls, which are really spectacular. When we did it last time, it happened to be just blue skies the whole time. So it isn't always like that, so don't necessarily expect blue skies. But even when it's raining or misty, you get a fantastic atmosphere of sort of swirling clouds and waterfalls coming down these sort of near vertical walls to the fields. And it's just very spectacular, whatever the weather is doing. Certainly on a day like this, we get lovely reflections. It's very beautiful. And that can be very exciting. And staying overnight, the nice thing about it is you go into a field like this one. In fact, I think it's where we spent the night. And we just turn the engines off, and you hear all these birds calling from all these forests, and you get native birds, which are really, the calls are absolutely beautiful. We were coming out of this particular sound in the morning, and I think we just saw a splash in the distance, and a group of dolphins joined the ship and just kind of swam along in front of the bows. And so you've got a feeling of being very remote, also of wildlife everywhere, and this incredible scenery. So it's again another massive highlight from a landscape point of view.
Yeah, and absolutely, conditions changing can really make something totally different. And in those sorts of areas, you can have, like you say, you can have something in the evening and something else completely in the morning. So it can really give you different things to play with. Excuse me. Forgive me. There's a tiny hiccup with the last poll, which is back up, and obviously I can see votes are coming in on that. So I asked really if people shoot wildlife photos as well, or if they're mainly landscape. So we've got 60% mainly landscape at the moment, but I'll keep us updated. Thank you for interacting with us, everyone. That's really cool. We like that. I am going to just move us on a little because I want to talk about this next area. Because it's kind of a mix of some of the things we've talked about with the Mount Cook end, in that it's high mountain scenery and the beautiful light that you get with that. But also we're going to get back down to the coast in a moment in a couple of images as well. So one thing I did want to say, Ben, is from my time in New Zealand, there's just a scale, there's a grandeur, I think is probably the right word. And I've spent time in mountains, but there's an openness, I think that's the thing to say, isn't it, about some of these huge scenes. We're going to see that here and on the next image even more.
Yeah, there is, and I've always loved being in the mountains ever since I was a little kid, and I still do, and I always will. And New Zealand has got some very spectacular mountains, and you've just got that sense of space and beauty, and they're quite otherworldly, some of these mountain ranges, and New Zealand delivers, in that respect, all over the place, basically. This is near Wanaka. This is actually the Aspiring National Park, looking sort of into the national park from a sort of hill near Wanaka, which is a village in the sort of central area of the South Island. And we go up here at dawn. We go do a sort of four-wheel drive trip up in a couple of four-wheel drive vehicles we hire, and we go up here onto this sort of a little hill in the middle of, just surrounded by bigger mountains in most directions, and you can look back down to Wanaka Lake in the other direction. And so you're perched up there and just wait for, if you get good dawn light, you're very, it's the most spectacular thing. So this is a sort of tighter shot looking into the mountains, but then you've also got the sort of wider views like this one, where you've got this huge riverbed coming past in front of you. So the previous image was sort of about a quarter of that one, that sort of distant group of mountains over there, that's right. And this is slightly later when the light has gone a little bit less colourful. But you've still got like sort of coming through into some valleys, but missing other areas. So you've got light and shade, and that gives the whole scene quite a sort of three-dimensional quality. And you can pick it's sort of, in a way, the light does the composing for you, because it focuses on certain elements of the image and just features them, and so you can just let them speak for themselves and let the kind of shadow areas sort of fill in the gaps, as it were. So here we've got that sort of lovely light in the foreground, just lighting up that river with all kinds of different rivulets, very typical of New Zealand, that with a lovely green woodland on the edge of the river and the slope beyond it. And then in the distance you've got the sun lighting the bigger mountains, and in the middle you've got the sort of middle ground is all in shadow. But that gives sort of separation for different elements of the image.
Yeah, and I'm glad you picked up on that, because a lot of times we've spoken to people on these talks, especially on the more landscape heavy ones rather than the city ones necessarily, although the same is true, to be fair, but how we wrestle with introducing depth into what is fundamentally a 2D thing in front of us as an image. And Ben's absolutely right, that light and shade. And it goes back to the very first one of these talks that we did a number of weeks ago with Joe Cornish in the Lake District, and very similar ideas and principles and ways of working to help give that definition and really let the landscape disconnect in a way from just being a single plane. Thank you again for all the votes. So that's obviously working now. And we've still got probably more landscapers than wildlifers, but that's okay, Ben. That's okay.
That's okay. And actually the theme of this trip is, it is largely landscape, but we just, you can't go past some of the wildlife we could see without really giving it a day or two. So it's that sort of mix.
There's a couple of, sorry, Ben, to jump on you there, sorry. There's a couple of wow shots coming, and I wanted to just get into these because for time reasons, but Wanaka, the body of water there is large, isn't it? And so you do get these sort of shafts of light coming in and great expanses to play with, and basically crazy light because there's often rain as well.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, a straight blue sky like we had in Doubtful Sound, or actually like one of the Mount Cook image of mine, is actually not terribly exciting. You have to struggle a little bit to make it look exciting. Whereas when you've got clouds, you've got some sort of dynamic going on in the sky. And obviously when you get sunshine coming through it, that can make it even more dramatic. So here, for example, we're on the same, I mean, literally I turned the camera around from the previous a couple of images, and that was what was behind me. So the shafts of sunlight were going all over the place. They were down here, they were coming down onto the lake and going towards the town of Wanaka, which is down there on the right, off the right hand side of the image. And then there were more shafts of sunlight going leftwards, which are the ones that were lighting the mountains we've just had a look at, and coming through to that valley with the river flowing through it. So you've got things happening all around you, and if you get the right light and the right sort of clouds and the right thing, it can all deliver. And equally, you make the most of what conditions are there. So if that had just been a flat grey sky with no light, I wouldn't have bothered necessarily taking a picture looking in this direction. But it just happened to light up at one moment.
And a great reminder to always be mindful of what's happening behind you, because often it's going completely bonkers. And bonkers in Wanaka is commonplace, I think. But one of the main reasons why this place is known, and we're just going to touch on this for a couple of minutes for time reasons, but is this very famous, very photogenic tree here on the lake as well. So tell us a little there, Ben.
Yeah, this is the sort of famous Wanaka tree, and you get coachloads of people stopping off to have a look at it. So it's been very well photographed over the years, but I think that's absolutely no reason to avoid it. I think it's in many ways a reason to go and see what you make of it, because so many people have found it important and interesting and sort of iconic. I think we're going to be staying in Wanaka for 2 nights anyway, so we may as well go and have a look. And we can go at different times. We can go at night if you want, or we can go at sunset or whatever, when there's not many people around, and go and have a look and see what we can make of it. And I think it's just a really good challenge, because that is one thing where you'll see pictures on the internet of this tree, and I think it's always worth having a go. And I mean, I've just softened the background here a little bit, just to make the tree stand out. I thought that soft green, spring green that you get in October, which is the time we're going to be there, and when we were there 3 years ago, whenever it was, just made it work nicely. It's a very beautiful scene, a very beautiful tree. So
yeah. And tree mendus, as the joke has come in from Kevin there.
I'll go with Kevin on that. Yeah.
Well, that's a cracker. We love that. I did want to touch, because geographically now you're moving back north, in a northerly direction, and we wanted to cover a little bit of this. So Lake Matheson is towards Mount Cook. That's correct, Ben? That's
right. Now this is again one of Richard's images. As I say, he spent 10 years photographing South Island, and as you can see, that time has paid off. He is not only an extraordinarily good photographer, he's just a really great, he's a really good guy to sort of co-lead these tours, and technically he's brilliant as well. Actually, he's very good not only at the sort of longer exposures and all the rest of it, but actually he's very good at Lightroom as well. He's a really good Lightroom tutor, and has done a number of videos and things on that score. So he's very much the sort of person, but this is one of the key locations we'll try and go to as we come up the west coast. This is looking back over the lake, where you get a particular viewpoint where you get Mount Cook reflected in the lake, and if you get the right conditions, it can be, as you can see from this picture, absolutely beautiful. We went there last year and didn't see, it was quite cloudy, so we didn't see the reflections, but it was still a very, very beautiful lake to walk around, and some beautiful forests and everything else. So worth a go, and if you get the right conditions, it can be truly spectacular.
I think, yeah, water, mountains, and then if you toss in a bit of great light, you're kind of just in total happy time. And I love this, but just before we move on, this sort of wisp of lights, flame lit. It's just absolutely special stuff, which is what it's all about. And as we've you head up that west coast, and actually one thing I did want to mention is that as you take that journey, there's mountains to one side, you sea to the other, and that's pretty rare. There's not a huge amount of places you can go to in the world where there's those huge mountains come right down to the sea, as you well know, Ben. But this particular area, these rocks are extremely geologically interesting, and so we did want to touch on this and obviously talk a little bit about black and white. So tell us a little bit more here about these pancake rocks.
Yeah, this is the Pancake Rocks at Punakaiki. It's the furthest north we go, and we spent the night here so we can go out to see these rocks at sunset. When I first saw these rocks, everyone had raved about them, and I was a little bit nonplussed because they're quite they're quite a dark brown colour. There's not a great variety in the colour in the rocks themselves. But then I started sort of thinking, actually, the shapes and the textures are really interesting. So that's where, a little bit of sideways thinking, it doesn't take much, but just thinking black and white might make this work, and the sky was particularly good as well, with these big clouds coming in from the ocean and some big waves. And here you're standing on a boardwalk looking out over the rocks, which are all these little pinnacles, which are made up of these amazing pancakes of rock. And then you've got a blowhole in the middle of it. So the sea is kind of hitting the base of the rocks and blowing up through this blowhole. And so you can use long exposures to kind of create this, blurry water sort of washing back down over the rocks. And the timing is sort of critical, but you can stand there for ages and get, just play around with it. So it's kind of an interesting place, really fascinating. And it's, there's all kinds of images to be had here, but I found black and white work better, and it made the most of the kind of ridged lines within the rocks.
Yeah, it's a really weird place, but extremely interesting photographically. And like Ben says, you can really get to it and access it, and there's space for you to make your own images there. And this weather coming in on this west coast is always kind of different. So through the course of the day, like Ben said, you can get a really wide range of stuff. I'm going to just move us on, and actually thank everyone for staying with us. There's going to be a question in a minute, which I'd really love your feedback on, to do with the live streams generally. So just stick with us on that, and I'll put that up in a moment or two and give you 4 or 5 minutes to answer that. But Ben, we want to just touch on, hill's a fun word here. Castle Hill looks a bit bigger than a hill to me, but tell us, because this is a particularly interesting little stop-off point, isn't it?
Yeah, from Punakaiki, we come back over a place called Arthur's Pass, which is very spectacular. And we just passed this location on the way back to Christchurch. It's more a sort of afternoon out sort of place. It's got some beautiful rounded rocks, very interesting boulders. There's people go climbing there. It's just a kind of stop off on a slightly longer drive than usual as we go back to Christchurch. So we stop off here for an hour or two, and it's got those sort of essential elements of New Zealand, of interesting rocks in the foreground. It's got bigger mountains in the background. If you get decent weather, it's fun, and there's a few people as well. Which adds another element to a picture. So it's a bit of an unusual, again, a location that's totally different to anywhere else we've been in the last 14 days. So it keeps getting, it's always different.
Yeah, that's it. New Zealand is the place that just keeps on giving,
Absolutely.
Especially the South Island, I think. But yes, we wanted to just put this other image in, and I'm just going to throw up the poll in a moment, so just be a minute on that. But we wanted to put this in because a lot of what we've dealt with has been the dramatic, large vistas, which absolutely New Zealand is world renowned for, and obviously is a thing you would like to play with photographically. But there are moments, Ben, where just focusing on these smaller, more intimate scenes, and even if they have their own little story going on, can be quite a good thing to play with, right?
Well, I think so. And as a landscape photographer, I think, quite often you're looking for the big view, and pretty much everything we've seen in this, broadcast has been kind of bigger views. And this is just a little reminder that quite often you can find these more intimate little views and intimate images and things that you like. And, again, this is a theme on one of the other tours I do in Noida with Light and Land, where there aren't the big views, or very few. And so you have to work out what you like about a place and find your own images and be more creative about things. And I think that's a really good exercise. And New Zealand has plenty of opportunities for that as well. So this is just a kind of little bit of put it in as a, people may think, oh, what's that all about? It's just a few posts in the water. But if you look at each post, they're all different. They've all got a little bit of a character to themselves. The reflections are slightly different, but actually make them look more similar. And then there's this lovely sunset light. I mean, we did, at this location, we also had a massive rainbow and it was all very beautiful. But I personally like this little cameo from that location as an image within its own right. So just a reminder that there are small things that you can as a photographer are fascinating as well.
Yeah, fab. And I'm very much a fan of that. And like you said, they're posts, but they're all different. And I love the fact these seem to be they're looking back in because of the cutoffs there, and on the other side is the same as well. So just as we come to a finish with Ben, and Ben, huge thanks. I love talking to you. We've done bits together before. We've done one of my podcasts. You came on and we had a great chat there as well about some of your background. And if anyone wants to know about bobbing around the Atlantic and everything else, then do check that out. But I've popped up a poll about the length of the live streams. I'm interested in how everybody feels about the length. I could come on and do more. I could do less. We could do whatever. We want to give everyone a good shot of learning about the locations and learning more about the tutors. So we'll be really fascinated if you can give us a second to just give us that feedback, and we'll always listen to that and try and work with it. But Ben, we wanted to finish on a stunning image with stunning light in a stunning place, because fundamentally there's a lot of that in New Zealand. So just wrap us up for a moment or two here and tell us where we are, and maybe put us there, Ben, take us to that place.
Okay, this was the morning, this is dawn Mount Cook, and we'd actually, we were going to go on that previous tour. We did a flight at dawn, which is going to be an option on this coming tour, but it will be an option rather than part of the tour. But in fact, just driving, this is literally going down to the little airstrip at Mount Cook, and we're just standing outside. We just got out in the car park at the airstrip, and this is Mount Sefton, which is very near Mount Cook, and the dawn light just produced this extraordinary, exquisite sort of moment where it touched the top of this peak and then gradually worked its way down. So this is a point where you've still got beautiful color in the light, and so but it's got about you've got about a third in shadow, a third in sunlight, and a third of the blue sky. So it's sort of divided the image up in kind of interesting ways. And there's something, the blue skies, obviously, it's just stops and there's nothing very interesting there. But the minute you go down onto that mountain face, there's all kinds of details. And I just, these sort of mountains I can look at forever. And then you go down to the shadows and it all changes color, and it's still really sort of monumentally huge and beautiful, I love it. I just love that sort of moment when you see more of it revealed or lit up by the sun. It's like the sun's just showing you more of this mountain as it comes down and down the slope. And okay, the color fades and it all goes rather white, but you've just this intense moment at dawn, watching this whole mountain range come alive with this beautiful light. So that's what this tour was all about. The last one was all about. I'm sure the next one will be the same.
Fab. Excellent description. And I love the fact the sky is blue. It lets us just get into this beguiling color and texture, which is here on the snow in the light. And that is a color that is very difficult to explain to people. You've got to see it. So as we sort of rally to a close, I would like to point out, should you wish to basically go on a tour of a lifetime, and that's a little bit of a big thing to say, but I think it's pretty true. Next year, 17th to the 30th of October, 2021, Ben will be there with Richard, who is based in New Zealand, to look after you through the South Island of New Zealand. And it is really, really, as I say, I have been, and it's really a mind-blowingly beautiful place to go. And being with those guys, you'll really make the absolute most of it. Top professionals all around. Next week, forgive the gear change, everybody. Next week, we are doing Switzerland with Sue Bishop, one of the original Light and Land founders, and she's going to be talking to us about wildflowers in summer in Wengen in Switzerland. And Sue is an absolute specialist in shooting flowers and in this area as well. So there'll be huge amounts to pick up from that. That again is something I'm not hugely experienced in, and so I'm looking forward to that. Hopefully I'm going to pick up some top tricks and tips. And what's very interesting, thank you for answering the questions on the poll. So far, 96% of you feel these are exactly the right length and you're happy with them at this time period rather than shorter. So I'm glad we asked the question, which is great. And even a couple of you saying you'd like it longer. Crikey. Yes, well, we'll see what we can do. I have to sleep at some point. But Ben, thanks a lot, mate. It's fantastic to see you and spend time talking about New Zealand with you.
A pleasure. No, it's been really, really good to be on and be able to talk about the tour, because it'd be great if we can make it work. And thanks for interviewing me.
Pleasure. And Ben also does other Light and Land stuff, including the one days, as we've mentioned, up at Padley Gorge Way and other bits, and the Noidart one every year in Scotland as well. But Ben, just if you can allow me to say, you've taken the absolute photographer thing here because you are in your converted camper van, right? Which is a totally photography thing to do, right?
I am actually, yeah.
We just need a dog or something as well with you.
Van life, yeah. Oh yeah. Anyway.
There you go, everyone. Rock and roll.
A bottle of wine in the background there somewhere.
Well, you can get into that right now. But for everyone out there, thank you very much. Thanks for taking part in the polls. I'll try and do more of those as we get along. And always, it's great for you to contact us and let us know where you're watching this from. But from myself and Ben, good night for now. I'll see you next week with Sue in Switzerland. Thank you, everybody.